Welcome to the boardroom. This is the Business of Esports podcast.
The fastest growing entertainment phenomenon of this generation.
I, Prophet of Esports, joined today by my friend and co-host William Collis.
Yeah, we got the book of esports out. It's a big deal.
So everyone knows me as the Prophet and William as the Professor. As the Prophet of Esports, I rely on trustworthy and meaningful data every day. Data from our research partner, YouGov, offers the most complete view of esports fans and gamers in the world, providing context to who they are, what they think, the brands they buy, and things they do. YouGov's connected insights and research services inform strategy at every level. If you're a team, a brand, agency, or rights holder, you should be talking with YouGov. Their partners measure and maximize ROI and are telling compelling stories with data. Visit yougov.com/gaming-esports to learn more. From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports after show live stream. I am Paul Dawalibi. I'm joined today by my friend and co-host, Jeff Cohen. Bit of a skeleton crew today. We have a few out. Down for the count. But for those of you who are new to the live stream, what we do here is we cover all the most pressing gaming and esports topics and news of the week. But we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. And just like the podcast, we discuss, we analyze, we look at all the business implications of everything happening. But the best part about the live stream is we get to do it live with you guys. We get to interact. You get to ask questions. You get to be involved. And today's live stream is going to be a bit more intimate, right, Jeff?
Seriously, I feel like we should almost invite someone from the audience, like in to participate.
Guest host, impromptu guest host. Just throw them into the fire.
Yeah.
And you've had your second COVID shot now today.
Yeah, I'm like, this is like my Michael Jordan flu game right now. I don't even know. I think I got like 102 fever currently. So. We'll see.
Look better than ever. I don't know what that means.
I got a haircut, so
there you go.
That was good.
That makes sense.
I'm still pale, so I don't know.
Christian says, "Pick me." we may have to. We'll have to have some kind of standing rule going forward, which is if we're down to two, we pick someone from the audience, and it's just impromptu guest host. Cam, Jeff, the Juice. Wow, that's electric. Hi, everyone. Cam, do you like it? Because we've been toying with this now for 2 weeks now. And I'm curious if you actually like the nickname, because it's sort of sticking. I think we're week 3, and it's I think it's starting to stick. I think people unanimously like Jeff the Juice.
We're almost at the tipping point.
That's it. Happy Wednesday, guys. Happy Wednesday, Christian. Gabriel, hello. Hey, Gabriel. And Cam says, both of you looking great as always. Cam, thank you. You're looking great. Thank you for coming. You are one of my favorite people in the whole world. Thank you for coming every week. And thank you all of you guys who come to the live stream every week. If you haven't already, tell your friends about the live stream. Bring a colleague, bring a friend, get them involved. If you're just lurking, please feel free to ask questions, participate. If not, continue lurking. I mean, fine. Both are good. All right. Podcast. Let me just tease the podcast, Jeff, before we jump into anything here. We had interesting podcast, covered some good topics. Of course, as always, guys, stop me if you want to discuss any of these things on the live stream. Happy to sort of have extra discussion on the live stream around them. But here's what you can expect tomorrow when the podcast drops. So we started with a little bit of a fun story, which was, it was a Florida tech story. And what was interesting about this was it was someone who had died and donated a bunch of money, after their death to Florida Tech to build a textile museum with their name. This is the Ruth Funk Center for Textile Arts. And since her death, Florida Tech ran into some financial difficulties, and to attract more money and more students, what they're now doing is they're converting this textile museum to an esports arena, which much to the dismay of Ruth Funk's descendants who wanted to stay a textile museum. And so we had an interesting and kind of silly discussion around esports taking over. But fundamentally, this poor textile museum is going to be converted to an esports arena.
I mean, objectively, an esports arena is more fun than a textile museum. I don't know.
This is true.
Sorry to Ruth Funk and her progeny,
her legacy.
It's just, yeah. I mean,
I hope Ruth Funk's not like spinning in her grave, right? Like you would think the Ruth Funk esports arena is also pretty cool.
According to her relative, she literally is. That's the quote.
I know. That's my point. This is
odd that they did. I'm surprised. Like, I guess Ruth Funk didn't donate enough money, because usually they don't just like repurpose, the donation that that you've made as a museum.
She donated 1.25 million, which I guess for Florida Tech is a sizable donation, right? That's not insignificant.
I have to imagine that, for Florida Tech, that's got to be up there. Isn't that what Bobby donated to Michigan?
No, 4 million. Did he donate 4 million?
Oh, 4 million. What's a couple million amongst friends?
But I think it's interesting because more and more schools are building esports arenas. I'm curious how many will repurpose existing facilities versus build new. So there was an interesting discussion around some of this, a bit silly, but kind of a fun thing to see, as long as your last name's not Funk. As someone who's in the esports industry, this was fun to see. LinkedIn user says, hi, Paul. Hey, LinkedIn user. Great show always. Thank you. Chris says, funk jazz music hall. They missed the boat. Chris, you would have preferred a funk jazz. Well, I guess I get it. Clever pun. But I don't know. Well, sure. I guess you could build a whole program around funk jazz music. Very specific. All right. So we talked about that. We also talked about this story, which was, let me reload this page. Tencent basically in talks with the U.S. You won't, for some reason, this is not loading. There you go. Tencent in talks with the U.S. to keep their gaming investments. So basically, the Committee on Foreign Investment is putting pressure on Tencent to divest their U.S. holdings, primarily their 100% ownership of Riot and their 40% ownership of Epic Games. So we had an interesting discussion around how we thought this would play out, what the repercussions of this would be, and if the government succeeds, what happens with these assets. I think is also an interesting kind of thing to sort of theorize about. We had a whole hypothetical.
I think the latter question is probably fairly simple. I imagine Riot would probably go public. Or just get sold to someone. But Epic, they would just operate. There's probably plenty of people that would buy 40% of Epic Games. So I don't think that one probably wouldn't affect the operations of the business. Riot would be interesting. They'd probably be a good asset to go public. Particularly now, SPACs, currently are a little bit out of favor, but generally are have been doing really well over the last year. Would be a pretty good asset to put into a SPAC. I'm sure there'd be a lot of investor interest. And if not, I think, an Activision or someone like that Activision would be the one that would make the most sense. Would probably love the idea of Tencent being a forced seller, here.
It's like you listen to the podcast, Jeff. So we had the discussion around Activision buying them, and we had a discussion around Riot going public. I think, one of the interesting thoughts that I'm curious to see your view on this is going public may just be antithetical to sort of the way Riot operates today, where, they are so focused on building great games and great sort of competitive games. They may look at Blizzard and go, being public hasn't been good for Blizzard, right? Like just from what the company has put out there since they essentially became public. They may look at that and go, we prefer the autonomy of being private. I don't know where that asset goes, or if it gets
I guess the question is, do you think that Blizzard has become, what has happened to Blizzard has happened to Blizzard because they're a public company or because they're owned by Activision? and maybe you could argue that the Activision ownership,
one and the same.
Activision, but,
Yeah.
but yes and no. I mean, I guess like why are they necessarily tied together, right? Like Take-Two is a public company. Rockstar, nobody's ever accused them of, not being able to do what they want to do artistically, and they never hit a deadline, and they make the games they want to make. So I don't think necessarily being a public company precludes you from making good games.
True, but it puts sort of unnatural pressure in certain places that may take Riot down a path they don't want to go. Now, if they did go public, I think one of the things we agreed on the podcast was just this would be the biggest gaming IPO. Like this would make the Roblox IPO, I think, look small.
You think it would be worth more than 40 billion?
Yeah.
Why?
Everyone and their Robinhood account is going to want to own a piece of League of Legends. Like it's just the reality, right? You're going to have just massive retail interest. You're talking about a game with however many 100 million players, like 200 million, something like that.
But what are they doing in revenue? I mean, they're much smaller than Activision. They're much smaller. Activision's a lot bigger than 40 billion market cap, but like, are they not, what's their revenue? It's probably like 2 billion. Is it not?
But
maybe less.
I mean, that's not how these things get priced. And you know that, not these days.
Well, I think
you have to factor in hype.
We're heading
and you
towards
have to,
a market where things are rationalizing. Number one, number two, yeah, like could a day one maybe trade to some ridiculous level? But you're seeing this with all these IPOs. I mean, Unity, Coinbase, a lot of these high flying stocks. AppLovin got priced at I think it was 22 times revenue, and then pretty immediately it's gone down like 30%. It's still, for what is a mobile gaming business, it's still trading a ridiculous multiple. So maybe that doesn't disprove your point that it could trade at this crazy multiple, but I just think that over time, like there is no rationale for why Riot Games would trade at a premium to Activision Blizzard from a multiple perspective. Like just
I personally think we would see Riot at 60 billion plus. So and look, I mean, Cam's comment is I think exactly what the retail sentiment would be. League, Valorant, that next MMO in the works, $ Riot, please, right? Like the ticker symbol also, like it's perfect.
I'm pretty sure. Unfortunately, I think that ticker symbol exists. Isn't there a blockchain?
Is there
company called? I think Riot Blockchain is like a pretty popular company.
Okay. Jeff talking Moneyball. There you go. That's what Jeff does. That's why he's here. Chris says, got the bourbon out for fundamental drops.
I mean, I don't know. I think overall, like eventually institutional investors are the ones who drive these stock prices, outside of rare scenarios where you get like a GameStop and stuff like a frenzy. And we happen to have been living in this frenzy the last 4 to 6 months. But I do think that's coming to an end, or it seems to be at least. And I think that, you'd be hard pressed to see them trading at a similar multiple as Roblox. So I would think they would trade below Roblox because they have similar revenue, I think. And League of Legends is a game, right? At the end of the day, it's a very good, very popular game, but it does the same amount of revenue as FIFA. You know what I mean?
The retail investor just mind share is so much higher with a Riot than with
the same. You can say the same argument. Like, why is Activision not trading higher? If they, people love Warcraft, people love Call of Duty, certainly.
Because there's a premium for the newness. There's a premium for newness. Yeah,
I think you are right, but I think that over time that would course correct. Like I think you are probably right in the near term. Same way, not to bring up our recurring argument, but I saw a tweet that was saying so Discord did like 180 million in revenue in 2020. Crazy low is what I mean. Like that is so low for a company that just turned down a $10 billion offer. That is so low.
Yeah, but they grew like ridiculous percentage, right? Like it was.
Yeah, they're growing user. I mean, they're doing what you would want to do as a social network / communications. They're growing their user base, but
that's it.
That's still a really low revenue number.
No, because the eventual buyer or the eventual IPO, the math's going to be simple. It's going to be users times some number, and you're going to end up with a huge valuation, massive. Like that's how social networks get priced, basically. Because once you have those massive network effects, monetization is relatively easy to turn on.
Tell that to
Not saying
Twitter.
it's trivial. Julia says, so where would we see Tencent invest if they're forced to divest from these major players? It's an excellent question, which we also discuss on the podcast tomorrow. But here's the question for you, Jeff, and it's an offshoot of Julia's question, which is, if they're forced to divest, right? Does Tencent make any more, like, how gun shy does Tencent become in general, A? And B, do they buy any other publishers in the US after this? Or is it just such a turnoff that you never see them play in the US anymore?
Well, I assume if CFIUS is making them divest, they're also going to put together pretty clear guidelines around what they're allowed to invest in the future, or if they are, period. Like, it would be odd that they would make them get rid of these two assets and then let them turn around and say, like, oh, but you want to buy Take-Two? Like, go ahead, like, have at it. They're not important, but Riot is. So, I have to think they would have to be gun shy, because it's a pretty large move for a government to make you sell an asset that you acquired 10 years ago, like a forced sale. CFIUS is a very important part of the M&A process for when you're an international company is buying a US company, but typically that process happens prior to the acquisition. So it's like, you announce the deal, you have to go, part of the closing of the deal, you have to get the approval from CFIUS. So if they say no, it's like, okay, well, the deal never happened. I don't know if there's ever been a case, I'm sure someone could Google this and tell me I'm wrong, but ever been a case where a company has 10 years after an acquisition been told, hey, you no longer allowed to own that, you have to sell it. I don't even know how that's like legal, or what is CFIUS's justification for that.
Yeah.
It's, hey, you can't own our assets. Like, sorry. Like, to me, it doesn't seem grounded in any sort of legal framework that makes sense. It's not like, a matter. I think CFIUS, their charter is about national security, and it's like, you can't own a strategic asset. Like, if a Chinese company wanted to buy like Schlumberger, like an oil company that's important to U.S. infrastructure, like, okay, I could see maybe we don't want our adversary or a foreign government owning, a big piece of American infrastructure. But League of Legends, like, where does the national security risk come in to having Tencent own 40% of Fortnite? Like, where's the rub there? I don't know.
It's an interesting one, because Tencent has just their entire gaming business is built around M&A. This kind of intervention would, this is maybe the only way to stop Tencent at this point. And if you do stop Tencent like this, I think, part of the conversation we had on the podcast was, what are the general repercussions for the game publisher sort of ecosystem in North America? What does that look like? Like, Tencent was sort of the big investor in many, even medium-sized studios, right? They were a lot of the cash that funded many studios that, we don't even talk about weekly on this live stream or this podcast. And they're a source of exits for those publishers as well, right? Like, you take out such a major and active player, there are inevitably, I think, unforeseen repercussions in terms of the ecosystem as a whole and how people act. And will we see more smaller studios, more bigger studios, right? Like, it's interesting to sort of think through what are the repercussions to the ecosystem itself if you sort of take the knees out of a Tencent.
Do you think it creates an opportunity for like VCs in the space, or, because someone will have to fill that void if there's, a hole kind of in the ecosystem or the value chain of the gaming sort of capital markets?
I mean, if I'm a VC, right, playing the early stage game developer like space, like if that's my focus, taking Tencent out of the equation would really worry me, and should worry my LPs, right? Like, all of a sudden now a big source of capital and a very clear path to exit disappears. Right? I guarantee you a lot of publishers are building going, hey, one day Tencent's going to invest in us, or one day Tencent's going to buy us. It's like, it'd be like taking out a Google, right? And saying the tech startup ecosystem will be the same. No, it won't, right? Like the reality is, we were talking about very active acquirers. You take a big player like that out, there are repercussions. So, Cam says, Riot heavily involved in their own esports as well. Yeah, I mean, they've got a great business. Like, there's no question it's a great business, which is why I think they'd get a huge valuation. Cam also says, Jeff has the full juice on this. Love the explanation. Thank you. Cam doubling down on the juice. I like it. All right. The only other two stories that we covered on the podcast. One was about Ubisoft, in basically saying that their profits might fall in the coming year. And as a consequence, or they sort of tied these two things together, I think, if you read between the lines, as a consequence, they're going to do more free to play. That the feeling is they're not doing enough free to play, and so the answer to profits falling is more free to play. Jeff, you're shaking your head.
So this is classic Ubisoft. I mean, they really every year and a half they have one of these events where they just like guide down and cancel, postpone games and blow up. I think the stock was down 11%, which I guess isn't terrible, but certainly not good. It's down like 35% in the last month. Fundamentally, the problem with this is that Ubisoft's franchises are not made to be free to play. They're not live services. They're not games that can really be loaded up with microtransactions. It's like The Division, the Assassin's Creed is the perfect example. Like that is a single player action RPG. Like you can't make that free to play. It doesn't make sense. And
I'm laughing just to cut you off because William, I made the point you're making on the podcast, and William actually had a great counterpoint, and he enunciated very clearly how Assassin's Creed could be a free to play live service style game. And I was sort of convinced. I think
he's wrong, but I'll listen to I will listen to the podcast. I mean, Ubisoft they've tried this before to implement, live services and really get deeper into microtransactions to kind of catch up on operating margins versus some of their peers, because they lag behind in in-game spend. And they blew up Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Like everybody hated it. The game didn't sell at all because they loaded it up with microtransactions. So my only hope and sort of thought that my only rationalization of this is that maybe there's something lost in translation a little bit, where they're not saying, hey, we're moving away from AAA. And it was more like, we're going to augment our AAA experiences with free to play, kind of like what Activision did with Call of Duty, with Warzone. And maybe just because they're a French company, English is literally not their first language. Like maybe the way they phrased it made people kind of have this reaction of, oh, they're moving away from AAA, because it just doesn't make sense. Particularly, I don't think it makes sense for any of the publishers with large franchises, but it certainly doesn't make sense for Ubisoft with what they have.
I don't want to spoil it too much. It's an interesting conversation, but William did have a good point around making Assassin's Creed a free-to-play live service that I had not thought of, and maybe no one has thought of.
How do you make money in this example?
Well, so I'll spoil it. Okay, I'll spoil it. But there's a longer conversation on the podcast, so you still have to listen to the podcast if you want the whole thing. But he made this great point, which was like, imagine it's Assassin's Creed universe, okay? And it's a free-to-play game, and you download it. And every few months or 6 months or a year, whatever, there's a new chapter that allows you to take your character to a new location and a new time period, right? And so it's like, it's a continuous universe, but instead of having these boxed sort of copies every year, it's more microtransactions around cosmetics and locations and things like that.
So basically, you're going to sell. So basically, you're not going to sell. You're going to create a new game, but then you're just not going to sell the game, and you're just going to sell microtransactions. Like, how is that better?
Well, because the entry point is free, right? Like, to get into Assassin's Creed doesn't cost you $60 anymore.
Right.
You want to go to this new time period, you pay. You want to go to this new location, you pay. You want a costume for this time period, you pay. You want to, like there are ways to monetize through DLC, microtransactions, etc., and make it more of a live service / persistent Assassin's universe.
I guess my only pushback would be like, I feel like they sort of already do that, right? Where you buy the base game and then you buy the DLC. So it's like you're basically just taking away the upfront nut. So you're hoping that you're going to get like 6 times as many, just mathematically. Either you're going to charge a lot for these DLC, or you're hoping you're going to get literally 10 times as many players come in, if not more, which is always the bet you're making with making something free to play. You need, because your funnel's wider, obviously, but the bottom of the funnel is much lower, right? We talked about the other day, 7% of people of the freemium on Epic Store was 7% conversion, and we were like, well, that's actually not that bad relative to mobile. But so if you're looking at, okay, you're going to need to convert, you're only going to convert 5% of people to buy these new levels in order to make up for that $60 upfront game. You're going to have to literally bring in 10 to 20 times more people into the top of the funnel. And I just don't know if there's 10 to 20 times as many people that are like, I wish I could play Assassin's Creed, but I just don't have $60.
And I think William articulated it better than I did. So again, I highly recommend listening to the podcast. But he compared it more to turning Assassin's Creed more into like a GTA, which feels doable, right? Like without ruining the essence of Assassin's Creed.
All I'm going to say is this exact thesis was literally like, look at the stock price of CD Projekt Red. Oh, how hard could it be? Like we don't know anything about building multiplayer games and having cosmetic economies, but like, we'll just make it into GTA. This is the thesis that every single player, like look at BioWare. Oh, how hard could it be to do this Anthem? We do single player action RPGs and we're really good at it. But like, how hard could it be to make a cosmetic economy and just sell a bunch of microtransactions? We'll figure it all out. It can't be that hard. No, fail. Ghost Recon Breakpoint, fail.
For the record,
whatever. What's the one that just whatever. Fallout 76, fail. Like all of these things. It's not
for
easy.
For the record, I agree with you. Okay, and on the podcast, I agreed with you. My point is fundamentally that Ubisoft hasn't made a good game in a while, and all the business model changes and innovation aren't going to save them from the fact that they haven't made a good game in a while. So,
true, but I would actually argue the only one that is good that they made has been the Assassin's Creed. The last 2 ones have gotten critically have done well.
Yeah, but there's like 12,000 Assassin's Creed games, and they're all basically exactly the same.
So now let's just make them all free, and then we'll definitely get more revenue. This is a smart plan.
Christian says, repercussions point by Paul is an important consideration. Wouldn't economics point to having it be a free market rather than putting in restrictions and regulations for max economic growth? Yes, Christian. This is capitalism at its finest. Don't let markets be free and operate freely. Don't try and force things. So I don't think we should be forcing Tencent to do anything personally. Now, there are some people I think legitimately who have concerns around Tencent's security issues, especially now that Valorant's like recording everything you say. So there's, maybe some national security issues, but
there's one other thing I wanted. Did you or William find it odd that they're doing it in Valorant, but not League of Legends, or are they already doing it in League of Legends?
Not that definitely not that they've admitted to. So if they are,
so isn't that odd if it's like, they're trying to just be, they're trying to do this to root out toxicity, and they have this good moral heart. Like, why are they not doing it for the game that's much bigger?
Because we both know it's not about toxicity.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's pretty clear. Test it with a game that has much less to lose than your main cash cow. Chris says the Division can easily be converted to a live service play. Yeah. William made this argument, Chris, so on the podcast, so he agrees with you. Ramsey said, couldn't it just be a focus on DLC, so free to play Assassin's Creed initially, then pay to unlock additional areas? Ramsey, William, touche professor who's not here, but William agrees with you 100%. That was his, you'll hear that on the podcast tomorrow. He articulates it so much better than I did in terms of how you can turn Assassin's Creed into free to play well, I guess. Chris says Hitman also. Yeah, all of these universes, like I assume you probably could. Cam says something needs to change at Ubisoft though. What was their last title that was a big hit and didn't have massive player base drops? Not much I'm excited for from them. Cam, agreed. And this is the point I brought up, which is they just haven't made good games. Like, unfortunately. Cam says, does League have voice chat? Just text, right? I'm all for the Valorant voice recording. Discipline needs to be made. Cam, I'm afraid to admit I'm not a League player, so I actually don't know. It's also not as important I guess it's important at the highest levels of a League, but it's not the same as Valorant where you need voice comms. All right, and just sorry, the very last topic that we covered on the podcast was this one. It was an interview. But the headline here was Herman Miller has quietly cornered the luxury gaming chair market, which most of the discussion was around how they did this in a way that I felt was different from the usual esports playbook. So in other words, no big flashy influencers from the get-go. They're not sponsoring huge tournaments all over the place. Yes, they did the deal with Logitech. Yes, they have some influencers, but it didn't feel like the big kind of splashy, high-profile kind of marketing campaign that we see a lot of in esports. And so we had a conversation around that. Julius says different audiences in League of Legends and Valorant, right? Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some overlap for sure, but they are different audiences, and there's some people who play League and don't play Valorant, and vice versa. I just think Valorant's a much smaller ecosystem to test things with, besides the fact that League, according to Cam, may not have voice chat. So, all right. We want to move on to some new topics, Jeff?
Yeah.
Can we start with one that we thought was too risque for the podcast?
Ooh, it's fun.
Too risque, because the last time we did a risque topic on the podcast, it got held back by Apple for like a week. It didn't come out for a week because they have to vet it. And it wasn't even anything risque that we discussed. It was just a word that was in the title of our podcast. So let's start with this sort of more risque topic. Let's keep it PG or PG-13 though, from a discussion standpoint. And the headline here is Steam rejects VR sex experience holodecks, XXX holodecks. Developers remain confused about Valve's rules regarding adult content. Now, what's interesting is, just let me read part of this so you understand what happened here. Holodeck submitted a nudity-free PG-13 experience in which a virtual model of actor Riley Reid performs a sensual dance while a video of other scanned models dancing played in the background. It was rejected with a boilerplate explanation that video pornography was not allowed on Steam. Now, first of all, I take issue with the name because my own company is called Holodeck. But Holodecks is very clever with the XXX. Do you think there's an issue here in Steam being allowed to police games like this or censor games like this, Jeff? First of all, first question. And second question connected to this. Do you think there is definite hypocrisy, right, when you have a game like Cyberpunk on Steam where there are similarly kind of explicit scenes, but that wasn't censored in any way? Like, no, Steam didn't refuse to sell Cyberpunk.
Yeah, it's a good question. I almost feel like I wish we had a lawyer here on the panel, because this is certainly getting into the realm of legality. So I'll take a step back from the legal aspect, because I don't know whether they are actually technically allowed to do that. I assume they are. From a moral perspective, no, I don't have that much of a problem with them, saying, hey, this is our platform. We think that this game is against some code of conduct that we've laid out, whereas this one is not. Maybe this, you can say, okay, there might be some nudity in Cyberpunk, but it's a game that's rated such a level that you have to be, you're supposed to be of a certain age to play it. And that's not the purpose of the game. It's not, hey, we're going to, it's a sex game. It's, this game just happens to have nudity and some explicit it's, what's the old Supreme Court thing about the quote where the guy was like, I don't know how to define pornography, but I know it when I see it. It's kind of like that, right? Like we all know when there's a difference between watching porn and watching a movie where there's sex in it. And that doesn't mean that the movie where there's sex in it, you would let your 10-year-old watch it, but it's very different than having a hardcore porn on your TV, versus watching American Pie or something. So I don't know. That was a roundabout way of talking about it, but I know there's deeper, issues in terms of censorship and legality. But from my perspective, like morally, I'm not outraged, or I don't think they're like doing something where they're censoring and you should be allowed to put anything on their platform.
Look, game distribution and I'm curious what everyone in the chat thinks, by the way, where you fall on this in terms of Steam censorship here. But game distribution platforms are maybe the hottest topic in the gaming industry today, right? With the whole Apple Epic lawsuit. If like Epic has purported to be sort of man of the people, right? Like this is all for game developers and, we're taking a smaller cut and we're empowering game developers. Like, do actions like this, you think, create more opportunity for an Epic Games Store, not only to differentiate from a pricing standpoint, but from a censorship standpoint? Like, do you see this as another opening? Do you, like, when you look at that broader context, are there any takeaways at all from the game distribution wars?
I mean, yes, they're definitely, they, as you pointed out, I mean, they are trying to position themselves as developer friendly and the easier portal to work with, good for the little guy, kind of ethos. So I do think this is an opening, but it's also kind of a slippery slope, right? Like Epic, I am sure, has their own set of criteria and their own set of, if we want to call it censorship, but I would, I think that's a little bit, that word has some kind of negative connotations. So I think that Epic has to be careful, right? If they don't want to be the platform that says, oh, we'll allow anything, because that can very quickly, lead down a path that they probably don't want to be led down, particularly when they're the company of Fortnite and kind of a younger, like I think if anything, they probably skew younger in their user base than Steam. So like, I don't know if they want to necessarily open Pandora's box in this case.
Ramsey says, wasn't Apple trying to make Epic admit there was porn on their platform already? Ramsey, I did not see that. I didn't catch that. Did Apple try and do that? And was it just games that? Julia says, doesn't Steam allow GTA? Reminds me of their strip scenes. Julia, like if you played Cyberpunk too, like there are scenes that are even more explicit than GTA's strip scenes, like considerably more explicit, with full blown nudity. But I guess the pushback is Jeff's point, which is if it's part of a game, it's sort of okay. If it's nudity for nudity's sake, then it's pornographic.
Like if it's part of the game,
this is like a lot of gray area.
If it is the game, then it's not okay. I don't know if that's like the best way to define it, but that's kind of what I'm thinking.
I hate to bring this up because it's so controversial, but I think it's an interesting analogy, which is the current meta for Twitch, this hot tub meta, right? Where if you have nudity of like on Twitch, like if I got on Twitch, okay, and I pulled my pants down, right, I would get banned from Twitch. But if you're in a hot tub, it's okay for you to be half naked because then the clothing is appropriate to the setting, right? And you're sort of saying the same thing here. If the nudity is appropriate to the setting, which is part of some bigger game, then it's okay. But if it's on its own, then it doesn't fly. I just see like such a massive sort of host of issues around trying to police these massive gray areas. Yeah, and I mean, Julia said it, like tons of gray area. Like what is acceptable and not. And I guess the unfortunate part, or I don't know if, Jeff, you consider this unfortunate, is the game distribution platforms do have all the power, right? Like Steam can just say, we don't want you on this platform, end of story. And that's it, right? There's no recourse. I guess you could maybe try go and get your game on Epic Games Store, but the distribution platforms are definitely not like impartial pipes. Cam says Steam has some unique games that are for sale. Shocked that we see this from Steam. I don't mind it though. I guess there's a place for porn games. I don't think they should be on Steam, Switch, etc. though. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, but like, I almost shouldn't say it. I think there's an opportunity to build a games distribution platform just for adult games. I don't even know if that exists. But there's probably there's an opening there when I think you get things like this happening. Sharky says same thing applies to rated R films. True, but all forms of digital entertainment have to deal with censorship across platforms and things like this. But almost always there's gray area. Christian says in the end it all comes down to social acceptance. True, but here Steam can do whatever they want, even if it's socially acceptable, right? However you define that. Camp says Switch disallows seducer games. Steam disallows holodecks. Go sell your games on a porn distributor if that's what the content is. Again, Cam, I think that's one way of looking at it. Chris says call it steamy.
I think it's pretty good.
That's pretty good. That is pretty good. Ramsey says, yeah, it was a discussion about adult games on the Itch App Store, which is on the Epic App Store.
Itch.io or something.
Interesting. Okay. Kotaku covered it. Julia says streamers on Twitch can't do a full 360 spin if they are wearing certain risque clothing, a bannable offense. Yeah. Although I think like if you're in a hot tub, it seems to be okay because I feel like I see it all the time. Cam says, Chris, yeah, steamy that is clever. All right, let's move on. We talked enough about holodecks. Although I still think the name's fantastic. I mean, it's really good, really clever. You want to talk about EA, Jeff?
Yeah.
And
Love EA.
EA's results here. So the headline here: EA signals gaming boom, extending run with upbeat annual forecast. And the headline basically says that they adjusted their revenue forecast above analysts' estimates, betting that demand for its titles, including FIFA and Apex, would stay strong even as COVID restrictions ease. There's general stats about consumer spending on gaming going up, obviously, but this is a big adjustment, I think, where they went from an estimate of 6.6 billion to 7.3 billion, which is not an insignificant jump in terms of guidance. I don't know. I'm curious to get your thought on. Have you seen this big of a sort of an upwards adjustment? And the second point here is a lot of the discussion was around very strong growth in Apex, which you wouldn't think, considering that the game's 2-3 years old now, but that they're very bullish on the future of Apex as well. So just curious to get your thoughts, Jeff, on EA in general, but also this move in terms of upping their guidance.
Yeah, I think I hadn't get a chance to look at the call, so I don't know, or dig into the numbers. So I don't know if the guidance, it might be a scenario where they're increasing the guidance also because they closed some of these acquisitions. So they might not have included like the Glue Mobile numbers in yet, and maybe this is the first time they're giving guidance with that, because you're right, that $600 million jump is a lot higher than what you would normally see. Like a lot of times you'll see, each quarter throughout the year, they'll kind of walk it up like 100 or even 150 million, but to do 600 million, particularly this early in the year, I think, because they just finished this would have been their fiscal Q1. Mm-hmm. Or no, did they just they just finished their fiscal year, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So it would be,
and this is for their full year revenue, right? For fiscal 2022.
Yeah. So it's a little early in the year for them to really be doing that. So I imagine it's a little bit of kind of just adding different stuff to the pie, but that's not to take away. I mean, they're like you said, Apex is doing really well. Has had, I don't even know if we should call it a resurgence. It's kind of just maintained, been steady, over the last 2 years. While everyone thought it was dying, I think it's had a pretty nice content cadence. And I guess this goes back to our earlier point we were talking about Ubisoft. It took, people forget now, like it took several quarters really for the Respawn team to get comfortable with the live service game. I mean, they were very candid early on after Apex came out that they were overwhelmed and they kind of didn't really know how to make a live service game. They were used to, that team had done more like boxed copy games, and they had done Titanfall, which, those games didn't really have a live service component. So Apex was very different for them. So it's not an easy skill to run a live service. And I'm glad now that Vince and his team have gotten to the point where it seems like they're like a well-oiled machine, because that's great for EA and it's great for the game and great for the space. Other than that, I mean, the only other thing I would point out from the EA results or EA's kind of recent activity, they've been super active on the M&A front, which I think is interesting. I don't know exactly what that says, whether that means we're kind of in the late innings of kind of the cycle, or if they just see so much opportunity that they're taking advantage of it. But they've acquired Glue, they've acquired Codemasters, and they just acquired some publisher of like baseball game kind of publisher. So I think that's notable.
Can I tie two stories together? What do you think is the likelihood that someone at Ubisoft, right, like management at Ubisoft, looked at EA's sort of performance here and the, all the talking about Apex and live service and all the sort of patting on the back that EA does around that, and said, you know what, we need to do something about this. Like and that was sort of a lot of the genesis around the messaging around free to play and live service on their end. Like, do you think, how much attention do you think Ubisoft's paying to other publishers, frankly?
I think they're all paying a lot of attention. I mean, there definitely is, strategy divisions and competitive intelligence and, all these inner workings between the companies. I don't think Ubisoft's announcement was because of EA's announcement. They wouldn't make that kind of strategic change, obviously, in like 24 hours. But I am sure that a lot of these companies are looking at the success of Warzone and saying, okay, Call of Duty just added a free-to-play component, and not only did their bookings grow and their revenue they brought in more players, and not only did it not cannibalize the boxed copy sales, they actually grew more than ever before. So it actually, I'm trying to tie it back to the Assassin's Creed example, but it shows that by making your game free-to-play, you actually can sell more copies of your game, which is sort of antithetical to what you would think.
Yeah, and obviously this is why Ubisoft seems to be wanting to make that pivot. But I do think it's interesting. EA, in spite of all the backlash, right, that they get around loot boxes and pay to win, and this article also mentions FIFA, right? And FIFA got so much hate around pay to win and having to pay for like the best players, and despite all of the pushback and all the noise, right, that you get on Reddit and in places where gamers complain, they're still like producing, they're still a juggernaut in terms of generating results. What is it like? I'm just, it's a bit of a tangent, but I'm curious what you think of sort of the impact of backlash against some of EA's more egregious like moves, and it seems to be no impact.
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, FIFA is basically a license to print money, right? That's, the hands down best franchise, I think, in all of gaming. Just the Ultimate Team model is the perfect model for modern day gaming as a live service. And it's a massively popular game. It's in and of itself, the individual FIFA is probably the second most popular upfront paid title. And then you obviously add on the live service component. But I'm trying to think what your other question. Oh, the impact. I mean, you did see, I think a lot of what we're seeing, the success of EA now is kind of because of some of the lumps they took, with some of the backlash. I mean, they did make a really good Star Wars game in the last year out of Respawn that didn't have microtransactions, was single player, and sold really well. And I think that was a direct result of the kind of the wrist smacking that they got from what they did with Battlefront. Even Apex Legends, I think the way they launched it, they talked, making it free to play and not having a big marketing campaign. I think a lot of that was due to some of the fan reaction to Battlefield. So, they have learned from some of the things that they've gotten wrong in the past.
Cam says, I'll need some Apex lessons, Paul. I tore it up on PS4, but I haven't put the time to learn controls on PC. Feels so alien compared to other PC shooters I've played. Apex has incredible movement mechanics that separates it from every other shooter. Cam, I'd be happy to.
I'm a Valorant player. I could teach you Valorant one day, Cam.
we were actually just totally rolling a bunch of Predator players in the new 3v3 mode over the weekend. So happy to play sometime, Cam. And Cam says, well said, Jeff. Would love EA to move away from their MTX microtransactions. So damn successful. Yeah, I don't think that's gonna happen. Not when they're putting up numbers like this. And
not
maybe
for
Chris,
sports, at least. No way. I mean, that's the whole business. They just never happen.
And Chris makes I think the right point here, right? To Cam's point, which is, there's a larger world of buying power outside of Twitter, outside of Reddit, outside of all the places where people complain. Like, Twitter is an especially special kind of cesspool. I just don't think. I don't think they're. It's interesting because none of the backlash has affected their business. None, right? Like, no amount of hate really affected their business, which I find fascinating. And fundamentally, if we go back to the Ubisoft example, it's because EA has been making pretty good games, right? Like, when it comes down to it.
Because I love to play devil's advocate here, the only counterexample I'll give you is Battlefield. The last Battlefield, there was a lot of backlash, mostly around the marketing of it, and it did flop. Now it also flopped.
I agree.
It wasn't a good game. It was delayed, and it came out with didn't come out with the Battle Royale ready, and it came out after Call of Duty, which was a lot better, yada, yada, yada. There was a lot of reasons, but that did hurt them. So, to
be clear, as much as people, I agreed with the hate on the Battlefield marketing. The marketing was terrible, but Battlefield 5 is still a fundamentally great game. It's a great game, and it's unfortunate that it didn't do better than it did. It never needed a battle royale mode. They should have never focused on that. Like, it's one of those games where they should have focused on what Battlefield does best. And I think it's really unfortunate.
You have high hopes for the next one? Do you think it has any chance to sort of, I don't want to say dethrone Call of Duty, but will it be close to Call of Duty in terms of sales?
Battlefield has always been the better game than Call of Duty. So I always have high hopes for Battlefield. Like, Battlefield games to me are just fundamentally better shooters than Call of Duty. The engine's better. The battles are more epic. Like, it's a more, for me, I speak for myself, but I think it's a more fun game. If they don't mess up the marketing, I think it definitely has a shot at making a run at Call of Duty. Battlefield, I think, never captured the console market in the way Call of Duty has. Call of Duty is a simpler game. It's a smaller game, right? Like, because the maps are smaller, the servers are smaller, like, it's more console friendly. Battlefield, because of how epic they tried to make the game, because of the size of the battles, the number of players, it's always been more PC focused, right? You needed a powerful gaming PC to run that game well. And so I think Battlefield will always be smaller than Call of Duty. Battlefield may make, like, EA may make the best Battlefield game ever. I just don't think it's going to touch Call of Duty from a numbers standpoint, because Call of Duty will always have the console kiddies. Always will. I don't think that's going away. Cam says, oh, no chance they'll stop. Extremely frustrating when every game mode is a copy paste, but Ultimate Team grows and grows. Wish they use the revenue to help support other game modes. Yeah. You always hope that with any live service or microtransaction based game that they're putting the money back into the game, but maybe not always the case. Salute to the boomers on the chat and Battlefield 1942 on PC. There you go, Chris. Bad Company 2 remaster when? Cam, there's so many great Battlefield games. That's just the reality. And Desert Combat. Man, that was a great mod. Yes, I agree. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about, this should be in your wheelhouse, Jeff. I don't even know how much you can talk about this. So we may move on very quickly here. But the headline got my attention, which is Esports Bookies Luck Box post 5.4 million Canadian annual loss amid CEO departure. And so the story here is about Real Luck Group, the parent company of esports betting company Luckbox. They reported this loss, 5.5 million for 2020. They're an esports bookie, allows fans to bet on all major esports tournaments. And what's interesting is basically the CEO stepped down just before, right? I think just before they announced.
Yeah, I think so.
No, just days after posting their annual performance. Sorry. So they announced the departure of the CEO, Quentin Martin, just days after. This is one of these stories, it's sort of fun sometimes to have business stories where we can put tinfoil hats on and sort of come up with conspiracy theories why the CEO would just pick up and leave. According to this article, I think it said that he voluntarily stepped down, whatever that means.
How much did they do in revenue? I'm curious. Didn't even say. So
revenue of 75,000 Canadian
for the year.
Even
if it's for the quarter, that's pretty low. Yeah, we talked about this the other day when it's a very interesting. It's a very interesting article.
They had revenue of $4,000 in 2019. $4,000 Canadian dollars.
That's like Business of Esports, T-shirt revenue.
That's true. It actually is.
Yeah, I don't really want to speculate because I don't know the answer. It's a pretty interesting story. You've seen a couple of high-profile departures. One, significantly bigger. Matt King, from the CEO of FanDuel, left this week, and I think that's a pretty big job that's open now, particularly with FanDuel potentially listing. Doing a dual listing here in the U.S. That will be a seat that's, who knows, maybe Quentin Martin's going to be the CEO of FanDuel. That would be pretty cool. But I don't know Quentin and I don't know anything about the story, so I don't want to speculate too much. But every time I've heard him on panels, he sounds good. I think they've built a pretty good company. Sounds like they've got a pretty strong, stud that's replacing him. So I think they'll do well, but it is surprising to see, someone who is kind of there, the face of the company and obviously the CEO depart with no real backstory.
They say, at least in reporting the results, that the calendar of esports events was impacted in 2020, right? Which is true, right? You had just fewer events to bet on. But none of this sort of the loss. They lost, just to be clear, they lost 5.5 million in 2020, but they lost 20 million in 2019, right? So it's it's one of these things where it's not like you can even say he clearly did a horrible job, right? There's definite improvement in the business, revenue's up, costs are down, right?
And they just raised a bunch of money. So the answer maybe is the people who they raise money from. Part of it, they wanted a different leader, or they wanted someone else, but they just raised them $20 million. So it's not like they're struggling. They're doing relatively well.
So Chris has a question here. Better question: did we saturate esports betting already?
I hope not.
No. I hope that was being facetious.
I think it's I think it's the early innings. I think there's a number of different companies going, same way we see in traditional sports. I think there's a number of different companies going after what is a pretty large and rapidly growing TAM. So,
and I would say we're literally in the first inning, right? Just the lack of options to bet in the US.
We're arguably in the second or third inning of traditional sports betting here in the US. Esports, the game probably hasn't even started yet, realistically. I don't think.
So, nowhere close. It's going to be massive in the U.S. There's no question. In the same way sports betting is going to be massive in the U.S. Yeah. It's cracking the U.S. regulatory environment. that is the crux of all of this, really, I think. I don't know, Jeff, if you have a different view on that.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, Christian's question here is a funny one, I guess. It's a little bit.
Can you explain how a betting company loses money? Too much spending on infrastructure and not enough betting.
Well, I mean, Christian, I don't know where you live, but if you're anywhere in the U.S. or like New Jersey or Illinois or one of these states that's open, I mean, you pretty much can't watch the TV or a sporting event without seeing an advertisement for one of these companies. So it's really spending on sales and marketing, and they're growing out their platform, and then also they're giving away a bunch of bonus money to keep people engaged. It's basically same way with mobile gaming. The customer acquisition costs are really high, but you're doing the math that the lifetime value of the customer is over the long term higher than that customer acquisition cost. So in the short term, you can be losing a lot of money as you're acquiring new customers, but over time, once you get scale and keep those customers, your margins go way up. Also, as they're building out into different states, different states are on different stages of that growth curve. So like DraftKings, for example, has said they're profitable in New Jersey because they've been in New Jersey for I think 3 years at this point, 2 or 3 years. So that state, if that state was a company, just DraftKings, New Jersey, it would be EBITDA positive. But because they're adding on all these other states where they're clearly spending and they're early in that curve, their overall, business is losing money.
Yeah, and Chris mentions this. FanDuel and DraftKings customer acquisition is crazy. Yeah, but Chris, they've done the math, right? Like the reality is once you acquire one of these customers and they're on your betting platform, like gamblers are good customers. And they're people have become pretty good at sort of modeling out the lifetime value of those customers. But you're right. And to Jeff's point, the customer acquisition cost is where the big expense is, which is also, by the way, why you see a lot of betting, whether it's sports or esports, buying content and content businesses, because they realize content's a path to customer acquisition, and often a much cheaper path to customer acquisition by acquiring customers through content. So, yeah, what podcast, Jeff, did
Dan Lebitard's podcast got bought for $50 million. $50 million over 3 years by DraftKings, and they've done a bunch of acquisitions. I mean, they bought Vegas Sports Information Network for $100 million. I saw an article. I mean, they hired a head of media, so there's some speculation they're kind of creating a little bit of a media business to go direct to consumer, which is interesting. But yeah,
there was another esports betting company that bought a media company in the last week.
Rivalry is big and has a big presence in. I know they tout their media and their social media and stuff like that. Trying to think which one you're talking about. Is it eBet? Maybe, I don't know.
No. Come on, seriously.
I'm not saying it. You have to make your own announcements.
was trying to just slip it in there, very cool and casual. I don't know. Thank you for not.
I didn't actually even think of it.
Thank you for not playing along. Yeah, esports.
You gotta make your own announcement.
Esports Entertainment Group also getting into the content and media game in a big way, guys. So if you didn't see that announcement, just search for it. Esports Entertainment Group. All right.
That was awkward.
That was, well, you just,
I didn't get it.
You did. Yeah. I'm going to blame,
I'm like working.
I'm going to blame the shot. I'm going to blame the vaccine. Chris says it's just timing. Yes. Agreed. We're just early. Christian, very informative. Jeff, thanks for the juice there.
I'm getting a lot of very informative. I feel like I'm really doing well tonight.
You are doing well tonight. Chris says Barstool scared them all. Yeah. Well, because content's just such an obvious way to drive betting and drive customer acquisition for betting. They just go hand in hand so perfectly. It's again why you're seeing all these betting companies, including Esports Entertainment Group, buying media and content businesses. Cam says betting scene is definitely something I need to learn more about. Cam, it's a space to watch. I don't say it like I'm not exaggerating. I think it's going to be one of the biggest drivers of revenue in the esports space by far. So definitely a space to pay attention to. All right. What do you want to talk about, Jeff? We can do a story about EA Sports games, do more EA. We can talk about a blockchain gaming platform called Forte, valued at $1 billion. We can talk about how Ninja makes money. Digital tabletop gaming platforms. We have time for about maybe one or two more stories. Overactive Media. Remember the $500 million stadium, guys?
Yeah.
The $500 million stadium was not enough. Now they have a gaming studio.
Gotta have a gaming studio. If you have a $500 million whatever stadium, why not?
It's not enough, right?
Are they going public? What's their deal? Are they getting all this money?
It's a good question. You would think that's in the plans. You would think they might have to if they're actually going to build a $500 million stadium. It's just, what do they have in their business to go public with? They have 2 esports teams. That's it. Well, 3.
And a stadium and an unfinished stadium. A bunch of blueprints.
They have
blueprints to a stadium.
They have pictures. I doubt they even have blueprints.
Hopefully they have a lease agreement or something.
Oh, no, I doubt it. Seriously doubt it. I'm pretty sure it's just pictures at this point.
It's pretty good. Not bad.
Are you impressed?
I mean, pictures don't cost a lot. They haven't spent a lot of money yet. It's good.
So what do you feel about them doing a Red Bull studio thing with a big reveal, splashy reveal on top of the stadium? Do you not feel this is a bit like overkill?
I mean, the stadium's not going to be built for a long time. So if they want to create content, they're going to need a studio. I don't think this is that big of a news, right? I think it's like surprising that they didn't have one already to some extent, you know?
Okay. Really?
I don't know. Do you not agree?
It's like building the team house after you announced a $500 million stadium. It's like, it seems like a step backwards, right? You just sold me on this like massive, huge project, crazy, you know, it's going to be the biggest thing in gaming. And then now we have this rinky-dink little like studio with Red Bull. You don't feel like that's a bit of a step backwards?
Hopefully they didn't describe it that way. That would be bad.
As a rinky-dink.
I see your point. I just think it's more like the timing. This stadium's not going to be done for years. Like they need some place to create their content now. So I don't know. Maybe that's too logical of a way to look at it.
All right. We don't need to do that story. We'll do. I think Christian says the blockchain story. But
the blockchain story.
Before we get to the blockchain story, guys, this live stream sponsored by YouGov. Before we get to this next story, did you know that esports fans say they're 3 times more likely to engage with tailored advertising than soccer fans, or that hardcore gamers in the US are 22% more likely to use ad blockers? These insights are pulled from YouGov Profiles, the most complete and granular data set for understanding what the world thinks and does. Go check out yougov.com/esports-gaming for free esports and gaming reports. I'm going to put the link in the chat, guys. Show YouGov some love. Go find them on LinkedIn. Go find them on Twitter. Go find them on Instagram. Reach out to them. If you guys are looking for data on the esports scene or the gaming industry as a whole, definitely go check them out. They're gracious sponsors of the live stream. And the data and insight that you can get from them is actually amazing. So yougov.com/esports-gaming. I will put this link up in a second here. Let's talk about blockchain. Hang on. Let me put this article up. I'm trying to do multiple things at once here. Blockchain gaming platform Forte, valued at $1 billion. The headline here, this is a blockchain-based gaming infrastructure startup. They raised $185 million, $1 billion post-money valuation. They have, solid investors. You're talking about Griffin Gaming Partners, Union Grove Venture Partners, Andreessen Horowitz, Battery Ventures, Tiger Global. Yeah, this is like as blue chip, as solid as venture investors get. And so they're sitting at this intersection of like NFTs and gaming. And what's interesting is they're more like infrastructure. So the idea here is that games that want to implement blockchain or NFTs or these kinds of technologies, they have technology or platform or infrastructure that can be built into games. Now, I'm curious, Jeff, we haven't talked much about the intersection of blockchain and gaming. We touched a little bit on NFTs and gaming. What do you think of a raise like this? First of all, no one talked about this. Like, I feel like this flew under the radar, even though it's a massive raise with maybe the best investors we've ever seen in a gaming company. But I'm curious what you think of this sort of development in general. What you make of this trend? Is this a lot of hype? Is there substance here? How do you feel about it?
I mean, there is certainly a lot of hype. Clearly with NFTs, blockchain, crypto in general, and then you toss in those investors. I mean, this is a pretty impressive show of force. But just because there's a lot of hype doesn't mean there's not substance behind it, or potentially won't be substance behind it. I didn't catch in the article, what actually they're going to be doing. But I do think that, I think you've talked about it before on the podcast, or William has talked about it. And I certainly agree that there is a place in the future for either NFTs or blockchain or something within games when you're buying these digital items where they can be tokenized and you're holding one of a limited amount of items, and then you have some saleability of it. Now, the one potential challenge with the saleability aspect is that, as I understand, particularly if you're talking about loot boxes, one of the big reasons why loot boxes are not considered gambling is because there's no monetary value. There's no way to cash them out. So as soon as you allow transferability, I think you could run into problems with it being considered gambling. But that notwithstanding, I think there is a massive opportunity here where you've always used the example of, the sword in World of Warcraft, where you're the only one who can wield the sword and then you can sell it. I think that is a great idea. Now, I didn't catch what this company is going to be doing. Are they, maybe they're the ones minting the NFTs, maybe they're doing the infrastructure, not sure. But I certainly think that there is a big opportunity for a company like that in the space. It will just be a question of when and how quickly do the big publishers catch on and start putting this into their games. I'm sure they're looking at it.
Yeah, Forte fundamentally bills themselves as like tools and services for game developers to integrate blockchain technology into their games, right? And so I sort of think part of why it got such a big valuation, big round, such marquee investors is I would guess many of them are looking at this like, hey, this could be the Unity or the Unreal Engine, right, of the future when it comes to blockchain and NFTs and other sort of blockchain-related technologies being integrated into games, right? It becomes the de facto sort of standard set of tools that every game developer uses because they don't want to roll their own. And then, if you believe that blockchain and NFTs and all these technologies have a future in gaming, now you go, wait a second, like if Forte really does have that set of tools and infrastructure and game developers are adopting this, that could be a really big play, right? Like, again, you could get something on the scale of a Unity or an Unreal. I don't know if you think that's the thesis here for these investors, if you had to sort of take a guess.
I think it is, certainly something of that nature, that they can be a tools business embedded sort of into the gaming ecosystem. And it doesn't seem that far-fetched. I think we've all espoused the concept. It seems like everyone's on board that it would make sense to have some sort of tokenization of microtransaction items. And then it becomes a question of, okay, how does that actually get implemented? And if this third party makes it easier for developers to implement, they have a place in the ecosystem. Now, we know nothing about what their plan is or how they are going to implement that, but like conceptually, to me, that's an idea you're willing to bet on. So it's not surprising that they've kind of assembled the Avengers of VCs.
I looked at Forte's own website, right? And it's interesting. Let me just pull it up here. They say over 20 of the world's finest game developers are already building on the Forte platform. And you look at this list and you go, it's not exact. Like, I mean, High Res is a pretty good, well-known studio, but we're not talking about like a who's who of game studios, right? Like some decent names on here, but it's not, you know, we're not talking about Blizzard. We're not talking about, you know, Respawn. We're like, we don't have this caliber of game studio on this list. $1 billion valuation's pretty rich, right? But clearly they're betting on a ton of growth in this list of names, right? You would have to. Do you know? I don't know if you agree with that, Jeff.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you're, you know, same way. I view this almost similar to how I view skills, where if you're a bull on skills, you are betting that at some point in the future, you know, you'll be able to play Candy Crush on skill. Like you'll be able to bet on Candy Crush via the skills platform, and AAA, you know, massive publishers will be embedding that competition layer into their games. It's kind of the same thing you're betting on here. So it's not surprising, and it doesn't, I guess I wouldn't be disappointed if I were them that they only have these adopters, right? The early adopters were never going to be at EA and Activision. Like that would be shocking if they were the first ones to try these new innovations, disrupting, you know, the industry model. That's just not the way innovation typically happens. So the fact that they even have those names means they have some sort of tech, which actually that's further along than I would have expected, I guess is my point. I
just want to read some of these comments. Sorry, I'm a bit behind here. Christian said, Paul, you should turn these YouGov facts into an engagement poll during after shows and on social media. Christian's a great idea. And we have plans to do a lot more with YouGov data and integrating it into the content and outside of the content. But I love this idea, and we're definitely going to try all of this. It's more just a question of time and resources right now. And, but that's a great idea. I think like I said, stay tuned over the next few weeks. You're going to see more and more come out of the YouGov partnership in terms of content and integration. But I appreciate it. Chris says, I'm still mad at the amount of vaporware I've spent on my son's Valorant skins. Give me NFTs. I mean, Chris, would it really have made a difference? It's a good, I like the comment, but it's like, if you had NFTs, fundamentally what changes for you? I'm just curious. Is it a sense that it may have more future value, or I'm curious how you think about why NFTs might have made you less mad. Cam says at YouGov on Twitter. Yeah. Thank you, Cam. Thank you for Cam, we need to hire you. We just need to, I thought you were going to be our merch guy, but maybe you need to be our promo guy here. Christian says, agree with Paul's point about it being the blockchain engine for the AAA publishers could be really valuable and support valuation, maybe lead to acquisition. You know, anytime a startup gets $1 billion valuation, the universe of acquirers definitely gets smaller. And now you're only talking some of the biggest companies in the world, either tech or gaming companies. At this stage, I think we're just seeing such a clear path to IPO for so many of these platforms that I'd be surprised if the exit was acquisition by a AAA publisher.
It would be surprised. Sense probably for a publisher, because you're B2B, so you probably need, you know, if Activision buys them, are they going to still let EA and all the others?
Unless you think it gives you some very unique advantage or something.
Yeah. Yeah. But you'd also be killing a lot of their revenue. But yes,
you're
right. I think the obvious exit would be to Unity or Epic or Valve, or a Facebook or someone like just a software company. But yeah, I agree. I think if you're already at $1 billion, you're either going to need to be acquired by someone much bigger, or you're going to need to go public to get people their return. Christian
says, happy to help. Christian, we love having you here every week. It really means a lot, and love the comments. Chris says, I told him I had Transformers as a kid. Today they are worth something. What's in his digital toy box? I mean, this is why you have NFTs selling for, ridiculous amounts of money. This kind of thinking, and it's hard to refute, right? It's hard to argue that, Chris. I guess who will care to buy a digital, like a Vandal skin 25 years from now, whether you have an NFT or not. We have to make the assumption that Valorant will still be relevant in some way.
Yeah.
And that to me is not a slam dunk. Yes, but maybe. I just think probably unlikely. All right. That's all we have for this week, Jeff. Do we have to do what are we playing this week? Because I know you didn't play anything. I have to put it up.
I was thinking about it. I was like, maybe I did, but I didn't.
Yes, you didn't. I actually finally put some good, like a good amount of time, like 2-3 hours into Apex 3v3. And if you're playing with friends, it's an interesting game mode. Great, I think, more as practice for like team fights and the comms around team fights and when to push, when to poke, when like I think it's a great sort of way to practice the team fights in isolation. I just think Apex has been so clever, like really, really clever in terms of the way they've rolled out content and now the way they've rolled out game modes. Really, really strong stuff from Respawn. I'm a little worried that they're now doing other games. Supposedly they're working on some other game because I don't want them to drop the ball on Apex. But I did finally play some Apex 3v3.
They do have multiple teams at Respawn, right? 'Cause they've made multiple games in the past.
Ramsey says, LOL is 15 years old and they have League of Legends 15 years old and they have premium season 1 skins in the store. So who knows? This Ramsey, it's a good point. I don't know if every game is going to act or be like League or CS:GO or World of Warcraft, right? I guess we have to ask ourselves, are those exceptions or are they rules in this industry? Jeff, I don't know if you have a thought there.
I don't. I'm just glad I made it to this live stream. I'm starting to die.
Okay.
It would have been really good content if I just died on this stream.
Yeah,
or
actually,
that I mean,
that
I'm
would
not
be
gonna die. I just had a vaccine, but it's more like I would just pass out.
If you had passed out, I would have been happy because that would have made for excellent content.
We could NFT that.
Really, we could have turned that into an NFT, a Business of Esports classic NFT. By the way, guys, if you haven't, you need to go consider buying the world's first esports NFT. It's actually seen a significant price reduction, and no, this is not an April Fool's joke anymore. We are actually going to be minting some really interesting new NFTs that are a lot of fun. And will be more reasonably priced. Won't be the $1 million kind of joke that we did for April Fools. But hopefully will be collectible because they actually are great art before anything else. So that should be interesting. So stay tuned for that. As always, guys, stay tuned for the podcast tomorrow. Drops tomorrow. Come back every week for the live streams. Please, we love having you here. All of you guys, everyone who participated in the chat. This is fun because of you guys. And so bring friends, bring colleagues, invite them to the live stream. Cam says, Jeff, you've been great today. Thanks for battling through it. The juice always is great. And make sure, guys, follow us everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. We're trying to grow the YouTube channel. If you guys noticed, we're putting out smaller cuts of the live stream out on YouTube around the specific topics that we discuss, hoping you guys enjoy that format as well. Like if you want to send it to people or share it or maybe just watch it after the fact. So please follow us on YouTube. It would be really, really appreciated. And as always, guys, thank you for coming and we will see you next week.